I don't totally buy this, discomfort is where growth happens. I think it's simplistic. Sure, people can often grow in times of discomfort, but my guess is probably people grow in times of joy and when things are going right. If I was on my game when I was at the university, I probably was learning more than if I was falling apart and stressed out. And you hear this all the time, right? Like, discomfort is where growth happens. I don't think we have a shred of evidence that those things are true. There probably is a relationship between anger and sadness, but sometimes I'm just irritated. People do this metaphorically. So they'll say like,
hey there, Lyssa deHart here, and welcome to the Coaching Studio, the podcast that dives deep with the brightest minds in coaching, psychology, organizational leadership, and the art of working with people. You'll hear intimate, thought-provoking conversations alongside rising and established voices shaping the future of human development. Expect real stories, bold ideas, and practical insights you can use to expand your coaching and leadership impact. Whether you're a coach, therapist, leader, or lifelong learner, you'll leave each episode with new insights and renewed inspiration. Let's go. Hi, Lyssa here, and welcome to the Coaching Studio. There are conversations that change how we see the world. Moments when listening goes beyond hearing words and becomes a catalyst for transformation. My guest today, Robert Biswas-Diener, is a global authority on positive psychology coaching, co-author of his most recent book, Radical Listening, and a master of asking the kinds of questions that shake us out of autopilot. So who is Robert Biswas-Diener? Who is he really? And what can he teach us about listening and provoking for real change? Let's get into it. Robert, welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this all week.
I have too. Honestly, I have to tell you, just backstory to the audience. We had a conversation about, 3 weeks, a month ago, and I felt like I was talking to a kindred spirit for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's fun to speak with people who are thoughtful about coaching, for one thing, just because you can sort of lift the hood and get in and really tinker in kind of a deep and fun way.
Yeah. And yes, I 100% agree with you. I really want to learn a little bit more about you. I know you, as do all of us, have a unique background that's all your own. And that person informed who you've become, so before all the books that you've written, and there are quite a few of them, and before the person that sits before me who is so accomplished, who was Robert?
You like to start big?
Yeah,
Who are you in an existential way? I think it might be most concise to sum it up by saying that I am an artist stuck in the body of a psychologist. And that's who I've always been since I was a little kid. I was always kind of a divergent thinker, very creative, loved to draw, felt artistic. Yeah, there you go. A picture I drew. It's nice that you happen to have that handy. But I was also very psychologically minded and very social, very curious about people's motivation, about their preferences. I can remember when I was very, very young, maybe 8, 9 years old, wondering where my consciousness was located. Like for a while, I thought that I was my eyes. And I can remember thinking that even at a young age. I can remember wondering why some people held some views and other people held opposing views. I can remember thinking, for example, about misattribution of causality when two events are paired together and you just think that one caused the other, that they go together, but they're actually completely random and unrelated. And I can remember noticing that, maybe age 10, 11, something like that. And so if you just follow that trajectory, it ultimately led me to being a psychologist who does a little bit of art on the side.
Yeah, it really speaks to me of the deep curiosity and wonder of the world and the people and the experiences around you as I hear you talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Some listeners may know this, but many will not. My father was a pretty extraordinary scientist. He's passed away, but he ranks among the top 1,000 scientists in history in any field for research citations. So, it made a pretty good impact. And he was very figural in my life and my growing up. And he believed that science was just an act of systematic noticing. He was not theoretically driven. He didn't have an axe to grind. He wasn't trying to prove something or validate something. He he just wanted to look out at the world around him and ask questions. And all of the scientists that he admired most, people like Jane Goodall, who observed chimps, or Carl von Frisch, who observed bees and identified the waggle dance, um, or Tycho Brahe, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but just observed where the stars and constellations were in the heavens at different times of year. And all of them went in sort of without assumption or supposition and just said, like, let's just chart things. Let's just see what's where. And then let's start asking questions about it. And I think I got a pretty healthy dose of that. And that has informed my coaching and other work subsequently.
Excuse the interruption, Lyssa here. I would like to ask something from you. If you like this channel and you like the content that I'm offering, please do a simple, easy thing for me, which is subscribe to the channel. And on that note, let's get back to the show. I can completely see that in you, that start with curiosity, and then the hypothesis may come out of that if there's a there, but it's that just curiosity about what we're noticing. It's one of the things that I mentioned earlier that when I met with you a few weeks ago, that I just had an instant kinship and that sense of just wonder of looking at the details of things. And I remember as a kid too, just like watching the ants moving, or just I loved animals and I loved Jane Goodall, and so like really that kind of observation, just sitting there in presence and observation of the world around me was just a happy place for me as well. And it really, what I hear from you resonates very deeply for me also. So
How
thank you.
much do you still do that? Look at the ants or
I
the other.
do. Honestly, I think sometimes it's less about ants at this point. But but I do. I find like we were just at the Oregon coast for my birthday and just sitting there and spending time with the stones. I mean, I was making little cairns with my brother. We were having so much fun just like building these little cairns, and just the little nuances of slight little micro adjustments to stones to keep them from tipping or falling, and seeing what we could create. But looking at just these little details has always been a huge fascination for me. Looking for patterns in things has also been a part of that for me as well. I don't know. What do you notice in yourself these days?
Well, I'm not going to answer your question. I'm going to follow up on what you just said. um, which is that, isn't that so interesting? I can only imagine that that informs your coaching work, right? Looking for patterns, but thinking not even the metaphor of balancing rocks, but just being so in the moment with the rock, not thinking that a rock is better or worse, but just how do these fit together in the moment? What can I do with these? It really is kind of very present and in the moment. And I think that it's so healthy for those of us who are in coaching or coach like roles to engage in some of that activity. And here's why I'm saying it. I'll hold out our online personas as sort of the opposite of this. those are places where you usually post with more certainty, where you're like, this is how I see it, this is what it is, let me share something that I already know is valuable, etc. But when you're at the beach and you're just balancing stones, there's so much more humility with that, and so much more just, let's see how this goes. And I think that's a nice counterpoint to what the internet asks of us.
I wasn't expecting that the conversation might go in this direction. So if we can just kind of like real quickly,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not real quickly, but I think you're bringing up something that I think is fundamentally important to people who are entrepreneurial also. Where's that line between the mask and the real human being? And how do we show up in our more whatever authentic is for us, right? Our more authentic selves as an element of how we present ourselves to the world, and what's required of us in order to do that.
Yeah, I think that I think of authenticity as almost like a kind of currency, especially in sort of this looming AI world. And I'm not trying to vilify being online or AI at all. I think there's wonderful applications of technology. Um, but I do think that people feel a certain pressure, or the technology is designed in a certain way that you are sort of presenting a face or tempted to present a face. And I think when people see authenticity, it really resonates. And I think people are hungry for that in a way. One trend, for example, I know that people, I'll just use TikTok as an example, but people watch videos on TikTok. I know people are as interested in the comments as they are about the video. And it's because the comments themselves are often quite funny, but in some ways they are authentic, right? They're really someone just saying what they think or making a joke or whatever. They're like more kind of in the moment than this packaged video that you're watching.
I had never thought of TikTok like that. I'll be honest, I really don't do a whole lot of social media myself because I go on LinkedIn. That's probably my primary social media. But I think you're right. I think it's in the comments where we see the non curated expression.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It feels like now you and your buddies are having kind of a funny conversation about this curated event. Like, you saw the movie, now let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think I had never really thought of it that way, but I really like that. I like that. And it really speaks to, I think, also just for entrepreneurs, be a part of your comments, like get engaged with the people commenting on the stuff that you do, because that's probably the real substance of the conversation in some ways also.
I think that's, I mean, Lyssa, right here, I think it's great business advice, right? That if you're posting and people are bothering to comment, even if it's a critical comment, if people are critical of me all the time, I just like their comment. My
Yeah.
standard thing is, if they're critical, I probably am not going to defend myself or respond, but I'm going to like it. And if they sort of add or make a recommendation or, whatever, then I'll say thanks or add something to that because they took the time.
I think it also sort of blows people's minds. I got a comment on my YouTube channel, and it was really critical of something that I was a coaching demonstration. It was super critical that what I was doing was not something they could ever do because their executives would never put up with that, right? Whatever it was. And it was their
Mm.
opinion. And I was just like, thanks. And I'm so glad the people that you work with so well, that you have a way of interacting and engaging with them that really resonates for both you and them. The world needs more of that. They didn't know what to do with that. So I got back, thank you. You know?
Yeah.
and and it was like, I was like, great. I mean, I don't have an attachment to people agreeing with me. I have much more of an attachment that they're thinking about stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, it didn't hurt my feelings either, because I don't know about you, but I mean, I think this actually kind of goes back into your approach to life. I mean, my approach to life is nothing's personal. It tells me more about the person than it tells me about me. And and in Miguel Ruiz's agreements, and that idea really transformed my life back in like the 90s or early 2000s when I read it for the first time. And I don't know, I'm going to be quiet. How's that
Yeah.
landing? What's showing up?
No, it's good. I definitely like that idea that it's not personal. It's not how I'm wired. I'm pretty sensitive to feedback of all types. I can be built up by compliment, same as anyone, but also sometimes a whole lot of compliments feel a bit overwhelming to me. And criticism feels pretty harsh to me. It's the thing, like I'll ruminate. If I read a pretty critical comment online, it can wreck my afternoon. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be responding or those things,
Reactive.
but it really gets under my skin. And I sometimes think like, wow, like you took the time and you had the time to like the opportunity to interact with me, and you just wanted to tear me down like that. It's so foreign to how I want to live life. I would never go out of my way to tear down another person. Like I would just say nothing
Hmm.
rather than tear someone down. If anything, I want to help people out, build them up. Um, you know, I can't imagine it. Um, but they don't know, it's the distance of an online communication. So I just try and protect myself from feedback, really.
Well, I think I mean, especially if it's going to impact you in a way that is that, like, taking your energy for an afternoon, even in a little slice of your energy. I think having that protective quality, so that you're insulating yourself a little bit from the and I don't even know if it's like psychological harm, but really the energetic waste of time,
Yeah.
that it takes away from just your ability to do what you do. And I would like to also say, one of the things that I appreciate about you so much is just how generous you actually are with people. Um, Commenting positively, sharing yourself, sharing other people's work. I mean, you are an incredibly generous human being, and so I can imagine that is a complete diametric shift from your how you just show up intrinsically in the world.
Yeah, which is my bias, right? I mean, I think we all have this. If you look at people's strengths, people tend to like their own strengths. If you're forgiving, you probably think that being forgiving is one of the best things a person, best qualities they could have, right? If you're funny, you probably like other funny people. And I think this is, that kind of like positive pro-social for me is exactly that litmus test when I interact with people. If people come across as sort of unnecessarily harsh or being harsh in public, I just have such little stomach for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the cool thing is we can do these things to protect ourselves, so that we can choose. I think of it, I kind of think of it like the energy that I align with, and then the people that are different than that, there's nothing wrong with them. They are who they are, but I just prefer a different energy. And so I'll just gravitate more towards those people whose energy I just really enjoy engaging with.
Yeah, I think I have like a little imaginary scenario sometimes when I think about someone who is just so, to my mind, rude. For all I know, they think that it was like really helpful criticism. And I think about them when they're not doing that. And I think, well, do they have kids or grandkids? Do their kids like playing with them? Do the grandkids like playing with them? Something like that. because they're just people. And that does help me vilify them less, although I still don't want to hang out with them or interact with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, interesting stuff. Other people, this just came up the other day. I mean, I don't know why certain things come up over and over again within a short window of time, but I think it's been attributed to Jung, but I'm not 100%. I don't know that he actually said it, but it was something to the effect of anytime you have more than one person in a relationship, it's dysfunctional. And so it's like this idea, right? Where, all right, so there's going to be some dysfunction. I choose the dysfunction I can handle best. Those are the relationships I aim towards.
Yeah, exactly.
As,
I
oh,
just want to call out that I really liked that you said that you wanted people to be thoughtful, because that's like one of my main things. When people just sort of do things on autopilot, or because it's the way they were taught, or because it's what the structure is set up for, it
mhm.
could be fine. But I love it when people come across to me as reflective, when they're like, I've kind of modified this thing, or I used to do it this way, but now I do it a different way, or whatever. Like that to me, I don't know that I'm right about it necessarily, but that just feels more sophisticated and valuable to me.
Yeah. Well, and that really kind of, in some ways, is a great segue into positive provocation, to which you may see I have a few post-it notes in here. And I mean, it's sort of there. You have a concept that you talk about in here, sort of the difference between big and small talk, and I wonder this idea of thoughtfulness and self-reflection, because I think like the difference in my mind when I first initially think of big, like deeper, and then I think kind of deep superficial. I mean that's the
Mhm.
binary idea that I created right in my mind about the difference between big and small talk. But I think you mean something slightly more expanded than that. And I mean, and I would love to hear just what's required to be able to navigate the two.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I didn't come up with that big talk versus small talk. I lifted it from Marty Seligman, who's the founder of positive psychology. So I heard him say, it's a phrase he uses, right? And he one time said, like, I don't do small talk. Like he doesn't want to know, like, are you a dog person or a cat person? He doesn't probably care if you have kids or what neighborhood you live in or whether you went to college, or like some of that kind of basic demographic information. Um, he just wants to get into the stuff that matters, and that's my word for it. And that's largely what a coaching conversation is as well, right? Can we just talk about stuff that matters? So if someone says, I had a great meal, you don't say what time. What was it at 6:15? Was it at 7:30? Because that doesn't matter. It's completely superfluous to the what's important, which is, what was your experience? What makes a meal great? Those types of things. How important is it for others to be present at a meal? Is it largely food? Is it accentuated by the social environment? You get into those kinds of questions, and that's what we do as coaches. And in the coaching session, I always go back and forth, like, is there room for small talk? Does it always have to be big talk? I don't know the answer to that, but I know that mostly it's big talk.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of it myself as sort of the difference between what's interesting, like it's interesting that you had a nice meal, and what's important. And I'm hearing the bigger, deeper conversation is, and you talk about Marsha Reynolds' work and Coach the Person, Not the Problem in your books also, and that idea of like going beyond the just the actions and actions outcome. It's that going deeper below the waterline to get to the real factors that are impacting that person? Like, is it that it isn't about the time or even what you ate necessarily that made it a great meal? It might have been, but it could have been the company you were keeping and the conversation that you were having or the space that you were inhabiting, or there's more to it than that, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to go back to your comment about coaching. You could have an entire coaching session that was just that nuts and bolts. What could you do about this? What else could you do about this? When are you going to do it? Who's going to help you do it? What's your plan? How are you going to hold yourself accountable? What's the first step, right? Just super what you're going to do. And we might say that that's shallower, but it is also effective. And many people want that. And it's often a bit faster. If someone comes to you and says, I want to create a fitness plan, and you say, what is a fit person? I mean, they're like, well, can we just get to the part where I pull out my calendar and start filling up my days? So there is kind of an inherent tension, I think, between this big, interesting, important exploration and some of this other stuff. And there's room for both. And I absolutely don't know what the ratio is, but I think, like most coaches, I do value those big questions. What would fitness buy you? If you get this right, what are you going to be like on the other side of it? Because we understand that can be motivating. Even in answering that and articulating it, it might provide seeds of a plan. So there is utility there.
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on this particular question because I have seen, and you were a psychologist before you were really doing coaching, and you and I share that kind of clinical background. And I've seen so many times where if the goal was too surface, I want to get fit and I just want to create a calendar. I've seen people do it for a while, but if they don't have the external motivation, if it doesn't happen fast enough, if something goes wrong, that it's gone. It isn't the movement for the joy of the movement. It is the I'm striving towards this outcome. And as soon as I either get there or it's too hard to get there or it didn't happen fast enough, the giving up ratio seems a lot higher, at least in my experience, or the ability to maintain that motivation seems really difficult. I mean, there are a couple type A personalities who are going to be like, I'm going to do it no matter what. I'm just going to get it done. But then there's the rest of us.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where going deeper, even in the goal of something that is much more embodied. I was working with somebody who wanted to lose weight, and it was like, what would be different in your experience of yourself if you had lost whatever this weight was? And it was about the ability to move and own and have pride in the way that they were moving through the world. Very different thing than 20 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. What has your experience been between those kinds of deeper, or I don't know, maybe big goals versus more shallow goals or goals?
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to open up a totally new can of worms, but this gets kind of to what is the real agenda in a coaching session. And I think very categorically. So I'm like, if we could just boil down, like, are there just like 4 types of agendas? Say, I'm just making that up off the top of my head, but and all the different things that your clients might say to you kind of fall into one of these buckets. And one of them is, I just want to think out loud. I just want to use this space to talk things through. I don't care if I have 4 specific ideas or a plan or someone I can go interview or whatever. Like, I don't need that. I just want the space. And that's almost like baked in big talk. Like, we just know it's going to be a big talk session. But more often, it's sort of, oh, I want to talk about, you know, how to get along with my boss who I really don't respect. Oh, and what do you want to have at the end? What's going to make this successful? I guess three ideas for interacting with him or for coping when he says something rude or critical, right? And that's that kind of like we're pushing them into the space where they want something very practical at the end. And we understand at the outset that that might change. And there's the tension. You're going to start with some big talk stuff, and then you're going to get more concrete and say, well, regarding those three things, what you thinking about right now? But I also think that there could be room just the nuts and bolts. I'm quite taken with solutions focused approaches in coaching. And the idea behind solution focus is you just start with, if this were successful, if you know, short of changing your boss's personality, but if you were handling your boss as well as possible, what would that look like? That's sort of the only big question. That kind of miracle question is the only big broad question you ask, more or less, in solutions focus. And then everything thereafter is sort of nuts and bolts. And when was it like this? What could you do? What can you draw on? What strengths do you have? What have you learned about this? You know, whatever, just kind of, and I think that there's room for that. So I think it's going to depend on the client's agenda, on the client. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, one of the things that strikes me is as soon as you start talking to somebody and they've got this sort of nuts and bolts thing, I want to be able to talk to my boss and not be driven crazy or whatever the thing is. As soon as you start asking questions about like, what are you noticing is the trigger point for you, or have you ever had this experience before, and what did you notice? Whether it went well or not well doesn't matter, just like what showed up for you and how is this connected. And now all of a sudden we've gone from the nuts and bolts into those deeper inquiries that are driving the behaviors that are leading to the outcomes. And so I guess my curiosity back to you is, I I will say that I was very much a solution focused therapist for many, many years, but I think you do go deeper. Even in solution focus, you have that outcome, but I think you have the outcome regardless. In coaching, or hopefully also in therapy, it's not just like, let's just wonder and navel gaze. You know, there's
Mm-hmm.
an outcome that at some point you if you don't go below the surface, that then people don't have, what's the word I'm looking for here? I'm not exactly sure, but they don't have the understanding of what's driving the behaviors. So they can change the behaviors for a little while to get the outcome that they say they want. But as soon as something stressful happens, as soon as something rocks their boat, they're going to default back to all the things that they always did to self-protect.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think it's got the sticky outcome that you could have if they understood why this behavior happens. The shutting down, the running away, the gobbling up the brownies, the wishing you had a different job, the whatever it is. How's that striking you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm wondering, as a thought experiment, if we do the same exploration around seeking positive behaviors as we do ameliorating negative ones. So, you know, if someone comes to you and they say, I really want this promotion, that's seeking, a positive. And you might say, well, what's important about the promotion? How does this activate your values? What's this all about? You know, if someone said, I'm wrestling with depression, not eating, not sleeping well, I feel blue, you're not like, what's that all about for you necessarily? You understand that they're highly motivated to change it because it's unpleasant. but you don't say like, and what would it mean for you to change this depression? I mean, we kind of know that it's awful, and so it's obvious why you want to change it, but we don't necessarily know that with the promotion, because we don't know if it's about the money or the status or the learning or we don't know it.
Interesting.
I have no idea. I'm just thinking it would be interesting to just tally. This goes back to the systematic observation and actually just tally in sessions, coaches, therapists, how much exploratory sort of why kind of discussion is happening around positive versus negative or approach versus avoidant goals.
Yeah, I mean, just this may just be coincidence and not correlated, but I'm going to guess probably a lot more around the positive, or when there's the negative, we're asking. I know I do. It's really the case. So I'm hearing the depression, I'm hearing the anxiety, the la la la, whatever that is. What would what would be the direction you would want to shift towards? I don't necessarily think it's like Pollyanna perfect, like live a perfect, wonderful life. But I mean, I wonder, I mean, from my perspective, and as I think about like Boyatz's work around positive emotional attractors and negative emotional attractors, and I think, you know, going down the rabbit hole of how horrible, awful, terrible it is, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure what the value then becomes for that person, because they've lived in that pool for so long. So I don't think though pushing them into like, let's get happy then.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the right answer either. Um,
Yeah. So
yeah, this is
what
really
does a depressionless you look like? Kind of what is that? Because we don't necessarily assume that it's peppy.
right.
Yeah.
Right. But what is that shift that you're looking for? And
Yeah.
maybe it's that I have a couple of good hours every day, or that I'm increasing my ability to be okay
Yeah.
during the week, and reducing my rumination, or whatever, right?
You know, this is so interesting, Lyssa. Obviously, you're a huge fan of metaphor, but I'm really interested in people. I'll confine it to coaches, but our own assumptions about the way things work, right? So everyone has assumptions about this is what I think, leads to well-being, or this is what I think. And you hear this all the time, right? Like discomfort is where growth happens. There's all these sort of pithy little things. And sure,
Witty.
people can often grow in times of discomfort, but my guess is probably people grow in times of joy. And when things are going right, you're probably better able to learn, right? Like I
Yeah.
know that if I was on my game when I was at the university, I probably was learning more than when if I was falling apart and stressed out. Um, so I don't totally buy this, discomfort is where growth happens. I think it's simplistic, but I see this all the time. People do this metaphorically. So they'll say, like, sadness is below anger, which situate that. I mean, that's a metaphor, right? Like that one is physically on top
Hmm.
of another, like it's covering it or sitting on top of it. Or anger is an armor and in which sadness lives. And first of all, I don't think we have a shred of evidence that those things are true. I'll just start with that. But coaches act on these assumptions about emotions, about discomfort, about hardship, about well being, about resilience that are often encapsulated in these very simplified metaphors. I mean, there probably is a relationship between anger and sadness, but sometimes I'm just irritated. Like it has nothing to do with some chronic sadness. I'm just irritated because someone cut me off. I'm not like I'm actually quite sad about the state of traffic in the world. And that's what's
I
underneath.
am,
That's what
but
that's what's underneath all this anger that I'm expressing. Like, no, I'm actually just kind of angry. Like,
yeah, they didn't use their blinker.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
I don't let them in, but they didn't use their blinker.
Yeah,
I think that's a really interesting point, and I do think there is research on how the brain responds to something like heavy and light, hot and
mhm,
cold, and so above and below. I think the brain responds to these sorts of things, these sort of metaphorical analogies. I don't think, though, when we're talking about the metaphors that might show up in coaching, I'm not listening for those kinds of metaphors. I'm listening much more for the owned metaphors and not the explanation metaphors.
yeah,
And so the difference is, it would sort of be like if I say to you, Robert, I'm gonna go to the store and buy a doormat. You and I both know what we're talking about. This isn't a deeper conversation about the state of my emotional, experience, right? But if I say to you, Robert, I feel like a doormat. Now that has shifted considerably,
yeah,
right? And so going back to the anger and sadness, I'm with you. I don't think that they're necessarily you need like they're not in my mind. They can be connected or disconnected depending on circumstances.
yeah,
I think probably threat is below all of it. Like there's something that's happened that's created a sense of threat, and we're having whatever our constructed emotional response to that is. I love Lyssa Feldman Barrett's work
mhm,
on the idea of how we create emotional responses, and it can be cultural, it can be our own, well, obviously our family culture, our personal identity, how we see ourselves responding, what we feel is the right way to respond to things. I think people sometimes cry about things they're not really all that sad about,
yeah,
and laugh about things they're furious about. And so I don't know that we can make these kind of absolutes,
mhm,
but I do think if somebody says, anger is an armor for sadness, I would be very curious because that's a construct that they've created for themselves. And so it
yeah,
tells you a lot about them. And so, like, if then I had a client who was like really trying to push me on this whole metaphor thing. And he goes, well, time is money. And I said, that's interesting. So tell me more about the value of time for you, because
mhm,
it clearly has an amazing value to you. And that just sort of stumped him because he thought we were going to talk about money, and the real thing was about time. And by the end of it, it was like the one thing I can never get back is the time I've spent, and that's why it's so precious. It led to a very different conversation,
yeah,
and we
yeah.
need to
And
get
I mean,
stuff done
it's
fast.
fascinating, right? Because if you equate it with money and you start thinking about what are the like the fungible actions, could you get time on credit? Could you put time on layaway? Could you, right? Like, could you
Yeah.
borrow time? Could you put a down payment on time? Right? Like, it starts opening a whole lot of avenues.
And I think those are big conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. The other side of that coin, you're so adept at finding these in the client, right? And distinguishing between like the own. I love the distinction between the owned metaphor. I'm also quite interested in what's going on in the coach. And that's where I find the coach believes, for example, that sadness is below anger. So that when they hear their client expressing anger, they maybe not with even understanding it are like pushing them to find out
Mhm.
what's below that. Like, can we get even deeper? But that's just their own private worldview that's
Bias.
coming in. Yes, bias would be a great way to put it. And I mean, I have them, you have them, we all have them, right? You should just know
We have brains, yes.
what they are. But I think it's quite interesting because I do think, at least if you look at what's being posted online by coaches are delivering these pithy statements like discomfort is where growth happens, hardship is the only way you could truly know joy, these things. And I'm like, well, that definitely is an attitude that will affect the questions you ask as a coach, or what you value as a coach, or what you tend to acknowledge as a coach.
Well, and you mentioned you talk about this in your books, I heard you in another interview talk about this, but this really brings up, and I said biases a minute ago, but our assumptions and how we listen. It's kind of like if you buy a new car, you see that car every dang place you go, right? Like it's like, I didn't know there were so many Mini Coopers.
Yeah.
But man, I live on an island of Mini Coopers apparently. And so it kind of is the same thing with what we listen for, right? Like, can you speak more to how our biases impact our listening?
Yeah. I mean, a simple example with attention would be the cocktail party effect, which is you can be in a great conversation and you can hear your name spoken from across the room. Because
It's like a dog with a crinkle.
totally, just like, what? And it's just like, some whatever subconscious part of your mind that's directing some scanning attention just is going to pick up on things that are relevant. You're more likely to hear your hometown mentioned than you are Phoenix, Arizona, unless, of course, you grew up in Phoenix.
Unless you're from there,
Yes.
yes. All the Arizonians. Woot,
Yes.
woot.
but so already our attention is being selective, and we also go in with biases in our motivation as listeners, right? I'm
Mhm.
really trying to help you. I'm really trying to support you. I'm really trying to be there for you. So one of the things, the arguments that we make in that book, Radical Listening, yes, thanks, perfect, is that your attention is selective, your listening is selective. You're not picking up everything. That's just not happening. And if you can admit to yourself that you're not simultaneously listening for the person's cultural background and what they're leaving out and what they're not saying and what their values are and what their attitudes, while also looking at their facial expressions, and you're tracking patterns and shifts in behavior, and like, you're not doing that all simultaneously. You can do those one at a time just fine, maybe even two at a time, maybe even in rapid sequence, but not together. So you might as well just understand what it is you're trying to accomplish. And I'll give you a quick example. People who are funny are
Like
listening,
me.
yes, are listening and pay more attention to pauses, because pauses are where you insert jokes, because jokes are about timing. And so one of the things that funny people track are pauses, quick pauses. And if you were just coaching someone, and probably you're not just trying to be funny if you're coaching, you probably have a different motivational hat on, you might notice a pause, but just natural pauses in speech are not high on your list of noticing. The pause you'll notice is probably an aberrant pause, probably a pause where the person really stops to think, and then you might say, "Oh, what was that pause about?" But in all honesty, you are probably not noticing 95% of the pauses, because none of those are aberrant pauses. They're natural pauses where someone stops to get a breath so they can speak more, or it's an implied comma or clause in what they're saying. You're not noticing any of that stuff because it doesn't feel that important to you relative to their emotional expression or the language they're using to describe their problem, or whatever it is.
Excuse the quick interruption, but I wanted to make sure that you knew that you were invited to my monthly Coaches Q&A. It happens every third Monday of the month, and we talk about all things coaching. We talk about coaching demos, we talk about competencies, we talk about what to do with resistant clients, we talk about all sorts of things. Plus, we have an added networking event at the end of it. So you are invited to join this community. I would love to see you there. And on that note, let's get back to our regularly scheduled programming. You talk about creating spaces of silence. And for me, what just really showed up as you're talking about this is, I think silence may be the one. I don't want to say it's the most important piece of presence, but I just saw your eyebrows move, so I want to. I love the smile. So, dude, what just showed up there for you?
Yeah. Um, I was really taken by an article I read. This might have been like 6, 7 years ago by the late David Peterson. He's one of the Thinkers 50 coaching legends. He ran coaching at Google. And he said essentially it's really easy to be a good coach, right? If you have like a little bit of ability to listen, a little bit of empathy, a little bit of desire to help, you can probably be a good coach. But it's surprisingly hard to be a great coach. And I always thought that that was kind of an interesting distinction. Like
Mhm.
there, you can plow in a certain way, and then there's sort of a natural stopping point that you really have to like level up for. And so it's interesting to think like what is it like in the great coaches, like what is it you see? And I think there are a few things, but one of those things I think is silence. It's comfort with silence. It's the ability to use silence. It's almost like silence literacy, if I had to describe it in a way, which is like a whole constellation of stuff. Which is like I understand different types of silences. I understand what silence can be for. I understand the gift of silence. I understand how uncomfortable silence can be for the client, and that could be awful for them or very motivating for them to take it deeper. But I should be able to tell the difference between those two things. Like, and silence really, I think is wonderful. Yeah, I'm with you.
I love the idea of it as a literacy. It
Mm.
is. It's a language in and of itself. It's the nonverbal communication. I mean, in going into radical listening, I mean, you have like the competencies for deeper connection, right? And I would assume that that capacity to be with the silence, and I think for a lot of people, and I mean, this is a kind of a global statement, so take it for what it's worth, but sort of the discomfort with silence is sort of a place that we often start. I think some people are more comfortable with it than others, but that comfort with silence, especially when we're wearing the role of therapist or coach or advisor, mentor, teacher, that sitting in that space is something we have to, speaking of curating things, but curate within ourselves to be, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay with
Yeah, yeah,
silence.
yeah. So interesting. And yeah, it's cultural, right? How comfortable you are with silence, but that's good news because it means it's in part learned, which means coaches can get better at it. We can learn to tolerate silence. In the book, I talk about going to a birthday party in Greenland, and we showed up. It was a teenager's birthday party, and really, I'm imagining what a birthday party would be like. Cake and singing and some presents and a lot of little side conversations going on. And it was dead silent. We went into this living room in this house, and I gave him a little bit of money for his birthday, and then we just sat. And like we just sat, it was a whole room of people. I want to say like 12, 15 people, and we were not talking. And if you ask sort of the more anthropological side of me, I'd be like, wow, this is a fascinating, deep appreciation of cultural nuance and difference. But inside, I was like, this is weird. Like, wow. Like,
I want balloons.
yeah, yeah, like
And a noise maker, please.
this is not my normal, that's for sure. Um, and you could just imagine like from that, like what else has happened within that culture that leads them to be so comfortable to that, and how sort of unnecessarily chatty we must seem to them. Like if they were telling that exact same story, like I went to this birthday party and these people would not shut up. Could hardly think, right?
Yeah, it is so funny. I have cousins in Germany because my grandparents immigrated to this country, and so they left family there, and so I have my cousins in Germany, and I know they love me. So, I mean, I know they love me, but I go there and it's like, I'm like, hugs, hugs. And they're like, hugs. All right, hugs. All right, Lyssa's
Yeah.
here, but it's like, there is a real difference in just how we are in a room and the comfort that even my German cousins have with just sort of not saying a whole lot.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, tell me more, blah, 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 and it is sort of funny. Now they love me and they're very used to me, so they're okay with this crazy American. But it is a shift for them and for me because then there's the times where I just sit back and we just hang out.
Here's a provocative thing for listeners who are coaches, and it has to do with listening. A lot of coaches do things that they believe are polite. We'll take turns when we speak, right? That's super normal. Like most cultures have turn-based conversations. It seems quite normal. But I would encourage all coaches to think about etiquette as just something that you learned, just like your German family learned one form of etiquette and maybe it's less huggy, and you learned another form of etiquette and it's more huggy. And that when you work with your client and you think you're being very polite to them, you might be forcing your form of politeness on them. Like your client might not want you to be waiting your turn to speak. They might be like, "Where are you? This is coaching absence, not presence. You're like, why aren't you jumping in? Like, why? How uninvested in this are you that you're not saying a thing?" And I think that it's just interesting. Yeah, I think it's interesting. And I think we do well when we make that more visible and more articulate with our clients so that we can co create something that works for both of us.
Yeah, that really speaks also to like getting to have a sense of the style of this person that we're working with also,
Yeah,
so that
absolutely.
we're fitting within their norms, within the way that they want to be with other people
Yeah.
and learning.
A quick book recommendation. My co author on radical listening, Christian Van Nieuwerburg, wrote a book on advanced coaching practice. And it's written around 10 different tensions within coaching practice. And one of them is this exact tension. And I love it, which is on the one hand, as coaches, we're supposed to be very authentic. You and I have already talked about that today. On the other hand, we're also supposed to be able to be malleable and adapt to all clients and just be the sort of personality generalist so that we could be funny or serious or fast or slow or whatever. And so there's a tension between this sort of adaptability and also, but aren't you a true person who is a participant in this conversation, not just this lump of clay that can be molded any different way? And I think in advanced practice, we are reflecting on what those tensions are. There's not a right or wrong answer to it, but it's just, could you take it too far one way or the other? Probably.
And honestly, I think that some of that comes out of practice, right? The more practice you have spending time with different people, the better able you are to assess your reactions and responses and the way that you're showing up and the way that I show up in my personal life with my family and the way that I may show up with friends or the way that I show up with people I'm just meeting or the way that I show up in a coaching conversation. Those are going to be different ways that we we arrive into meeting whatever the moment is we find ourselves in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that adaptability that you're talking, that I think I hear you talking about, is that ability to not just be a lump of clay as a receiver, but to what degree is your partnership engaged with the person that you're working with?
That's one of the things I love, and I would actually put that. I mentioned the things that I believe separate good to great, and it is that partnership is one of them. Because I think novice coaches really are like, "Am I getting this right?" It's really pretty self focused or model focused. Am I doing the model right? Did I ask the questions in the right order? Did I make sure it was open ended? Was it solutions focused? Whatever you're being trained in. And then I think you graduate to this next level, which is like, oh no, it's client focused. But I don't think that's all the way there. I think people stop there because client focused sounds like you've graduated from self focused. But I think you graduate from client focused into partnership, which is we're both here and we're creating inside jokes and novel language. We can see patterns from one session to another. It's us. I'm not a non-player character. I'm in it with you.
Yeah. Ready Player One.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. No, I really think that's it. I think that's a crucial distinction also. I mean, I love client led. I think that is fundamentally, that's my bias, that I find ways to be led by the person who I'm working with. That is so important to me. It's still part of my learning curve though. So it's not a perfect form inside of me yet either. I don't expect it ever will be, but it is sort of my emphasis. And that does require me to be a full partner, because otherwise I'm maybe busy thinking of a question that has nothing to do with what's being offered versus being really fully present with the person that I'm having the conversation with,
Yeah.
and having the question maybe emerge from what's been shared.
And even in client led, so the client setting the agenda, the client's going where they want, the client's deciding where there's traction, you're still you, and you're still probably, let's just make up a statistic, you're twice as likely to see a metaphor as I am. Right? So I'm pretty good at metaphors. I think you're probably pretty great at metaphors. So you could still be client led, and yet, because the client's working with you and not me or not someone else, there's a real you that's going to be metaphor driven. Like if a client works with me, they're probably going to get teased at some point. And I still want it to be client led. I still want the client to direct
Mhm.
things, but I'm not, if they're upset, I can be a little more empathic or whatever. But at some point, I'm still just going to be me.
Yeah. And I think that I mean, it's almost like a full circle moment back to authenticity.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think we have to find the place where we're comfortable. And I mean, I can be empathetic, I can really deeply listen, and I'm still going to show up as myself. And I'm probably going to tease them also. So, I mean, because things are funny. I mean, and people say funny, ironic. You talked a little bit earlier about those tensions. And I think of the competing commitments that we have where we're, you know, these two beliefs are completely the same for me, even though they're diametrically opposed, and I believe them both the same. And it's like, that's hilarious. Like, what just happened there?
Yeah.
And the willingness to be ourselves. I think it's also really important, and be curious your thoughts on this, but I think it's really important that we are, because so few people know how to truly be themselves, that it's kind of important that we model it in a way that is useful. I don't know.
Yeah. I
How's that
mean,
landing?
in some broad way, I think the question of modeling in coaching is a really interesting one. People are, I think, hesitant to take it up because it smacks of influence, and heaven knows we don't want to influence people. And yet, of course, we're influencing people. Let's just start with that as the presupposition. We're influencing them overtly in many ways. There are many benefits to role modeling. But then, if we accept that, then what is it all we're role modeling? Are we role modeling professionalism, punctuality, care, authenticity, well-being? If we're doing things like, I'm too sick to meet with you, I want to cancel, or I'm too distraught to meet with you, I won't be a good coach to you, that's role modeling self-care or client care. And how important is all of that? And I've never, I'm sure it's out there, but I've never really read a comprehensive accounting of role modeling and the types of role modeling and coaching.
That'd be really interesting. Because I think that there's so many, I mean, going back to the radical listening, I mean, there's so many nonverbal things that we do and say, even though nonverbal would not be saying something, but still, if I'm sick and I say I'm constantly canceling because I'm not taking care of myself and I've always got a cold or a flu or a allergy or I just don't feel well or I have a headache or whatever it is, I'm communicating something. Even if it's that I think I'm just being honoring that I don't want to waste your time or we need to reschedule or whatever. And once in a while, everybody gets it, like everybody gets sick once in a while. But what are we communicating on multiple different levels and the multiple different levels of listening?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I feel like this conversation, I could happily have it for the next year and straight. And I'm thinking that may be a long time for people to listen to it. Um, Robert, what is on the horizon for you in the near, like kind of in the near future? Where is your attention going towards?
I'm interested in aesthetics as they relate to coaching. I believe that this kind of comes out of my interest in art and craft, but I believe that we are not just like these helping machines. I believe that in medicine or in coaching or in therapy, you watch someone do an intervention or do something and you're like, oh, like that was beautifully done. Right? Like you might see a therapist just say this perfect turn of phrase or the perfectly timed pushback. And you're just like, ooh, wow. Like aesthetically, that was gorgeous. It's not just what was it effective? It was gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested in that in coaching. So, for example, in brief or solutions focused coaching, there is an aesthetic around brevity, right? Can the coaching be as small as possible? I think there's a certain aesthetic around slowness, right? We don't want it to feel rushed. Coaching feels somehow less beautiful than slow coaching, which feels expansive. And so I'm just interested in what some of those, like the norms for our collective aesthetics in coaching are.
I can't wait to hear what you discover on that.
Yeah.
I have a tradition that I have on this podcast where I ask a guest to leave a question for the next person that I'll be interviewing. And I have a question for you that is not one of mine.
Uh-huh.
But the question is, what do you love most about your work?
Oh, gosh. I think people do well when they can bring their strengths to bear on their work. And my work, because I created it, is perfectly aligned with my strengths. I'm a good thinker, I'm a creative thinker, and ultimately, I want all of my thinking to be useful and helpful. Um, and so, almost all the work I do allows me to just be very, very thoughtful. I just love thinking. And so I have like giant chunks of the day where all I'm doing is like reading and thinking and having conversations like this one and generating new ideas and just thinking. And how else what have I overlooked? What am I missing? How else might I see this? And I mean, you can see the smile on my face, right?
I can.
Yeah. So I think that's it. I like to be able to do what I do best.
Yeah, I love that you cultivate that time and create that spaciousness for you to have the time to spend thinking.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how much I have appreciated having you on the show. And thank you so much for coming and joining me in the studio.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. I wish it were twice as long, but we'll hopefully do it again.
Well, there you go. I think that may be the right answer. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah. Thank you.